G'day everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today here for this fourth market briefing prior to ATE 2021, today focusing on the UK and Northern Europe. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dominic Meerling and I am part of the industry relations team here at Tourism Australia. Today, I'll firstly be getting us started here and then be facilitating some question and answers at the end. Firstly though, in the spirit of reconciliation, Tourism Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We've got a great lineup here today. Bear with the team, they're heavily caffeinated being early morning over in the UK. We'll start off with Sally Cope, our Regional General Manager for UK and Northern Europe, providing a bit of a market update, and then jump straight into the distribution side of things with Pete Mills, who heads up our partnership and distribution. Pete will also then be facilitating a bit of a Q&A with James Herbert from Orderly Travel before Stuart Fife, our PR manager, will have a bit of a chat with Chris Haslam from The Times. And then, time permitting, we'll answer some of your questions as well. We've had a few questions come in before the webinar, but if you do have any, you will note the Q&A function at the bottom, so send through any questions that you have there. And just some quick housekeeping before I hand over to Sally as well, that this briefing is being recorded and we will send on the PDF of the presentation afterwards as well. And there will also be a survey afterwards, which we would really appreciate if you could fill out, since it helps us to make future ones a lot better as well. And with that, I'd like to welcome Sally Cope, our Regional General Manager for the UK and Northern Europe.
Thank you very much, Dom, and welcome everybody. As Dom mentioned, it is bright and early here in the UK. So thank you very much to our partners who have joined us this morning here, and great to be able to talk to all of our industry colleagues down in Australia. So to get started, on New Year's Day this year, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, "There's light at the end of the COVID tunnel. The vaccine provides increasing hope of returning to normality by Easter." It was an optimistic sentiment at the start of this year when the country was just about to peak on another wave of new and highly virulent strain of coronavirus. We'd reached really scary numbers where it was estimated that 1 in 50 people in England had COVID, and the daily death toll came close to 2,000 people. But as it happens, that optimism wasn't unfounded. With the rapid and effective rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines, there was a direct correlation with the decline in daily new cases, hospitalisation and deaths. And now we're sitting at over 32 million people in the country who have received their first jab and over 8 million their second. This means that 62% of people over 18 have had their first dose of the COVID vaccine. The government has set out a 4-stage roadmap for lifting lockdown restrictions, which hopes that all legal limits on social contact will be removed by the 21st of June at the earliest. So sitting here in London right now, it really is starting to feel like there is light at the end of the COVID tunnel. So for us, looking back on 2020, there's no denying that it was the toughest year in the history of the global tourism industry. As most people tuned in today will already know, at Tourism Australia, we defined a clear strategy for how our international teams around the world would handle, or what we'd prioritise when the pandemic took hold. And it was two-pronged. First of all, we were determined to stay present as a destination brand in market by maintaining always-on content marketing, using digital, social, video content and activating media partnerships. And secondly, we knew it was really important to stay engaged with our partners, our distribution and aviation partners here in market, as well as our industry in Australia. So the UK team have genuinely worked tirelessly on both counts. We've stayed active in the media to ensure UK consumers remain inspired by or for their next big trip to Australia. And we've stayed connected to our partners to ensure they're ready to join us in driving demand and visitation when travel restrictions are lifted. It's been a roller coaster of a year. We had 2 optimistic months in summer that you can see coded in green there, when lockdown restrictions were largely lifted. We've had bad news like the demise of STA travel, and we've had great outcomes like the success of the Australia Marketplace online event. The consumer engagement with our marketing activity has been phenomenal and really vindicated our approach. So in good news, our regular travel sentiment tracker is now showing clear signs of the rising consumer confidence here in the UK. As already mentioned, the vaccine rollout has definitely influenced this, but there are also macroeconomic indicators that support this, like low interest rates, government stimulus, and unprecedented household savings. Of course, there's deep concern about the long-term social and economic impact of the pandemic, but within our target market of UK high-value travellers, we can hold on to some optimism that intention to travel is increasing and Australia is perceived as a safe destination to travel to. In fact, just looking at the column on the right here, it's heartening to note that consideration and intention for travel to Australia is increasing. The top trigger for wanting to travel is identified as simply the need for a holiday, and the top barrier is that travel restrictions won't allow it just yet. Our industry partners here in the UK agree there's real pent-up demand. They're all really keen to secure booking requests for travel to Australia in the future, and that way they can lock in clients before they start considering other destinations. We recently received results from the latest survey undertaken as part of TA's ongoing consumer demand research project, and they've yielded some really promising insights as well. For example, Australia is most closely associated with the top importance factors UK travellers have identified when choosing a long-haul destination. We're number one for all except value for money, where Thailand and the USA lead. Australia's lifting in association with safety, which is great, and for nature and wildlife. Somewhat steady for aquatic and coastal, and we've slightly turned down for good food and wine and friendly citizens. Thailand's lifting on association with good food and wine and for value for money. And the USA and New Zealand are our most prominent competitors here in this market. For long-haul travellers generally, Australia ranks as the second most desirable destination behind the USA here in the UK and maintains a significant lead with our target high-value travellers. The US is perceived as the most cool and fashionable destination, with Australia ranked third amongst long-haul travellers and second with our high-value travellers. So as you can see, the picture's building that the US is our standout competitor in the UK market. And finally, this slide reiterates the point most clearly. When we look at purchase funnel rankings, Australia is number 2 for the most considered destination amongst UK long-haul travellers, and second for intention and experience awareness. The US remains the leader on all metrics. So what this slide shows us, though, is that Australia is gaining some ground. We're reducing the gap with the USA, which is still the clear favourite amongst UK travellers. Canada, the Caribbean and New Zealand are still amongst our key competitors in this market, but Australia is now well ahead of those destinations. And I think this confirms that our strategy to keep the brand alive during the last year is working. By maintaining our always-on content marketing, we've managed to keep UK travellers engaged with the destination and hopefully primed to pick up Australia for their next big trip. It's worth remembering that the UK has a long history of delivering solid tourism numbers for Australia. In the year ending December 2019, the UK was ranked number 4 for arrivals, number 3 for total spend, and number 2 for dispersal. We all know that UK travellers spend more, stay longer, disperse widely, and it's a highly valuable inbound market. I am confident it will be again. I'm also confident that when travel restrictions are eased between the UK and Australia, the market is likely to rebound really quickly. And there's 3 reasons for this. Firstly, it's a resilient travel market with a proven history of rebounding after previous crises. Our own qualitative research recently returned a really interesting insight, which said UK travellers are somewhat cavalier in their sense of risk. As soon as they can, they'll travel abroad to familiar destinations like Australia. As mentioned, the economic indicators point to immediate pent-up demand. All the talk about revenge spending after a year of social restrictions does actually make sense. In fact, I watched an Oxford Economics webinar recently where the message was clear that the new vaccines will motivate the return to growth in travel, and that leisure travel will lead the rebound over business travel. So as I said, we have a motivated distribution network here in the UK who are primed to capture this opportunity. To do this, they'd love to be able to secure the bookings for 2022 now. So consumers want to plan ahead and put their money down now. Secondly, we can also leverage the positive sentiment towards Australia here in the UK. As the consumer demand insights clearly show, Australia ranks second after the US for consideration, awareness, and intention for travel. And in 2021, we've got two key events that TA can leverage as Australia will be in the media. They are the Ashes, of course, at the end of the year, and the Australia-UK Season of Culture, which is a collaboration between the British Council and DFAT to strengthen and build cultural connections through the arts. And thirdly, we've identified our priority audiences to target for rebuilding the market. They are those visiting friends and family, people who want to reconnect and are from the UK. The VFR market typically would be about 50% of annual arrivals each year. Then there's, of course, the working holiday makers. The job market's going to be tough. And there are uni graduates over here right now who are currently sitting at home with mum and dad, probably working in their local Tesco's, who just love to get away. And then, of course, there's just the resilient long-haul travellers I mentioned earlier who have the savings and really feel like they need a holiday. Our biggest threat to rebuilding the UK market when international travel restrictions ease is simply missing the party. As I've already mentioned, we're doing our utmost to hold on to market share right now, but as other destinations open up sooner, we won't be able to avoid losing travellers to competitor destinations. As the vaccine rollout speeds up in North America, it's likely that a transatlantic green lane will open up and the US will be poised to capture a lot of the pent-up demand before we can. Our only security against this is if our distribution partners up here can secure bookings to Australia in advance. Remembering the booking lead time can be 6 to 12 months from here, and people are looking to put their money down for travel in late 2022. The aviation links between the UK and Australia have always been strong. Prior to this crisis, there were over 1,000 flights per week with just one stop linking the UK and Australia. By July last year, of course, that had completely plummeted by 93%. It's been slowly rebuilding as several carriers have remained connected through freight services and also repatriating Australians. Our challenge will be how quickly capacity can rebuild when the borders reopen. And the other challenge we need to contend with is meeting the expectations of today's conscientious traveller. We all know that Australia's tourism industry has wonderful examples of sustainable and regenerative visitor experiences, and we will absolutely be putting the spotlight on those. We've plenty to appeal to the conscientious traveller, but here in the UK and in Europe, the growing flight shaming movement presents the challenges for long-haul travel in general. We're focusing on key messages around less frequent, longer trips replacing regular short breaks, and highlighting the value of considered immersive travel experiences over a fly and flop style holiday. So to finish up, our priorities in the year ahead will continue to be much the same here in the UK as they have been for the last year. We remain committed to keeping Brand Australia alive in the market through the always-on content marketing, and we'll continue to do so in close partnership with our STO partners here in market, our key distribution partners and the airlines. This means we will also stay close to our key stakeholders here in the UK by creating events, communication channels, distribution partnerships, destination training, and business development opportunities to really ensure that all of our partners up here are ready to move when the travel restrictions are lifted. And to that point, we'll continue to focus on being prepared so that we're ready to start driving conversion straight away, even if we get very little notice about travel restrictions lifting. So with that, I'll now hand over to Pete Mills, our Distribution and Partnerships Manager, who will provide a brief update on ATE Online before James Herbert from Audley Travel joins him for a chat. So thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Sal. Hi, everyone. So on that note, I thought it'd be a good place to start and give you an overview of where the UK is in terms of ATE buyers from this region. And as you can see from the slide in front of you, we're in a pretty good place, actually. It's worth noting that we're actually over on all but one of our buyer targets, which is amazing, considering the UK travel environment has gone through such a significant upheaval in the last 12 months. So taking into account consolidation of roles, redundancies and furlough, and many buyers are still working reduced hours, buyer numbers are actually really healthy, showing a desire to remain engaged with us as Tourism Australia and the industry. So just in terms of the numbers here, as you can see, we've got 85 primary delegates, and that's broken down as 55 from the UK and 30 from Northern Europe. We've got 16 first-time buyers, which is amazing in itself, and 15 Lux buyers this year for the new Lux stream, and a selection of both you can see on the screen there, and look out for those when you're preferencing your meetings for ATE. Do also look out for our key distribution partners who have multiple buyers attending ATE this year, and of course our friends at Audley Travel. That leads me very nicely to introduce my guest today, James Herbert. Now James, as many of you will know, is Product and Operations Director at Audley Travel. James, welcome. Thanks for joining us so early this morning.
Great, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So for those of you who don't know James, James has worked within the Australian tour operator sector for almost 25 years with experience of the youth, the VFR and luxury segments. Having started his career selling holidays to Australia at Travel Mood, James has spent 7 years at Austravel, holding various leadership positions across sales, product and marketing. Whilst he was there, he was responsible for operating a successful charter flight program, which many of you will remember, from London to Sydney and to Perth. James then moved to the supplier side at APT with responsibility for European trade sales and marketing before a period with STA and then the sub-brand Bridge the World as commercial director. James joined Audley Travel in 2012, initially setting up the Boston office in the USA before taking on his current role, where he has responsibility for global product, purchasing, aviation and operations. Now, in terms of Audley Travel itself, that was founded in 1996, has 3 offices now, London, Whitney in Oxfordshire, which is the head office, and Boston in the States, and employs over 600 people. And you'll be familiar with Audley, are experts in experiential tailor-made travel, selling over 100 countries with emphasis on immersive and unique experience, which is ideal for Australia. And talking of which, Australia is consistently within the top 5 destinations sold by volume. In 2019, 65,000 clients traveled with Audley Travel, producing a hugely impressive Trustpilot satisfaction rating of 94%. The 2 main client segments are identified as the over 50s, traveling as a couple, city professionals, honeymooners, and families. And it's worth noting also that Audley Travel is majority owned by private equity company 3i, who are listed on the FTSE 100 index in London. So James, that was quite impressive. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
James, can you just paint a picture for us of what the last 12 months has been like for Audley Travel, and how have you had to adapt to the current environment?
Yeah, sure. No problem at all. Good afternoon, everyone. So like many businesses, we had to take very quick and effective action to react to the crisis in sort of March, April of last year. I think our actions broadly fell into 3 buckets. So we looked at clients, which are the heart of what we do, and were prioritized, our people, and I'm sure like many of our supply partners, the kind of cash position as well. First and foremost, it was very much about making sure that we were providing excellent service to our clients. So that initially involved the repatriation of a couple of thousand clients who were dotted all over the world at the time, including repatriation from Australia. But then it moved very quickly on to management of our order book and our future bookings. And that, unfortunately, has obviously had to continue over the last 12 months as we've gone through lots of bumps in the road in terms of border opening and closures. But we were very keen to ensure that we advocated postponements as opposed to cancellations. And we're really pleased with the way that that's played out, because actually about 70% of all the bookings that we had at the time of the crisis has actually moved into postponed position as opposed to just cancelling. So we do everything that we can to actually keep those clients. We've had to do a lot on our terms and conditions as well. Clients are looking for much more flexibility and don't want to commit monies up front so much. And we've also made sure that we've really stayed close to our suppliers as well, so that we understand that relationship, we understand the pressures that they're going through, and that we're working in tandem with them. One of the other things that we did, not Australia specific, but not dissimilar from Tourism Australia's holiday here this year, domestic focus, was we had to look at different markets as well. We've always traditionally been a long haul operator, but we did have to look closer to home. So out of the UK, we launched a European program as well to make sure that we could capture that. So lots of things from a client perspective. Staff are also equally important. So we've moved our entire workforce to remote working in the space of just a couple of weeks at the beginning of last year. Really key that we had regular communications with them as well as we went through into more of a remote working environment. But we also took the opportunity to invest as well, and invest in utilising the time to enhance our business offerings. So we've worked on a new proprietary system for our back office bookings, which is now in place. We've worked on our ways of working as well, so that we become more efficient. But we have had to also reduce space as well in our offices. So we have reduced space in both Boston and London. And then again, like many businesses, we've had to really look at our cash position. So obviously immediately stopping all non-discretionary spend. We did have to take a look at our headcount as well. In both the UK and the US, we're fairly fortunate that we had the furlough scheme, which is actually still running. So we were able to utilise that certainly through the summer months last year. But we did have a reduction in our headcount through both voluntary and compulsory redundancy schemes. But off the back of that, we still retained a workforce in excess of 600 staff. And yeah, I really believe that as a business now, it's given us an opportunity to be well placed for recovery, and we're seeing that recovery come. We're certainly a much leaner, more efficient organisation. Pete, you mentioned about our Trustpilot scores as well. We think we've enhanced the brand over that period as well by really putting the clients at the heart of what we do and offering exceptional service. And the good news is we have now started to see a return to the sort of booking levels that we would like, which shows there is light at the end of the tunnel, as Sally was saying. We're certainly on an upward trajectory. If we go back to April of last year, we were probably trading at about 10% of our 2019 levels in terms of new booking intakes. That's grown steadily over the last 12 months to a place where in March, we were up to 65% of 2019 levels. So still not obviously where we would like to be, but it certainly shows that upward trajectory and shows that, yeah, things are progressing. And as I say, there is that light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it's so nice to see, isn't it? As Sally alluded to, the UK consumer is a resilient bunch. We know that for sure. And we expect to see this pent-up demand drive future sales. So what booking patterns are you actually seeing at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if I look at this on a macro scale, what we're certainly seeing is that all the research certainly still points to the significance of travel. Again, Sally kind of alluded to this, but people are no longer taking it for granted. And I think particularly if we think of our demographic at Audley, which primarily is that 50 plus, you know, they really now want to, when they're traveling, they want to make it count. They've never been in a position before where travel's been taken away. And this is kind of manifesting itself in a continued desire to go long haul, which is really encouraging. So despite the sort of European program that I mentioned, despite the growth of our beach share, particularly destinations like the Caribbean and Indian Ocean, the majority of people are still looking for that traditional long-haul, cultural, tailor-made holiday, quite often that sort of trip of a lifetime. Certainly our core demographic, they are that category that Sally mentioned of willing travellers. They're certainly very buoyant at the moment. Obviously, the vaccination program is well progressed for that demographic. And they've had a couple of years of travel taken away from them. So now they want to make sure that they make it count. I think what is clear is that it'll still be a bumpy ride. clearly government announcements are really impacting on consumer sentiment, both positive and negative, actually. So if we see positive press, if we see positive announcements from the government, we see that spike in demand. If it's perhaps not such a rosy picture being painted, then we certainly see a drop off as well. And I can see that continuing for a short while yet.
Yeah.
What is clear is that those destinations that are perceived to have really managed the pandemic well are certainly very well placed for future travel. And Australia obviously falls into that bucket. It's had really good PR, it's dealt with it incredibly well. And we're all incredibly jealous of the lifestyle that you're still able to lead in Australia compared to here and the lockdown that we've been in. So for consumers, that certainly offers kind of reassurance and confidence in the destination. We sell over 100 countries, as Pete mentioned. Australia is consistently in the top 5, but some of the big competitors, there are trends starting to emerge. For us, the likes of India, South Africa are certainly not to the levels where they would have been previously, whereas destinations such as USA, Canada, Australia, Caribbean are all up in terms of relativity to those other destinations. So what we're seeing is some key trends around people looking for that familiarity of destinations. They want confidence in health and hygiene, but they're certainly spending more as well. They're not skimping now. So if they're going to go, they want to make it count. That means they're traveling for longer. We've seen about a 20% increase in the duration that people are traveling for, and that's also then manifested itself in an increase in our average booking value, as well as people really kind of, as I say, make it count. We're also seeing that further booking window and lead time as well. Historically at Audley, for our global offering, it would be about 6 to 7 months, but we're now averaging a 10-month lead time, which comes back to that point that Sally was making about sort of 2022 departures. And we're also seeing a little bit of multi-generational travel come in as well. So trends for that in terms of people just want to spend quality time with family and with friends as well. So we're also seeing the kind of the average group size just increase slightly as well. So quite a lot going on, Pete.
It certainly seems like it. And in terms of Australia-specific inquiries, are you seeing any sort of behaviours emerging there at all in terms of the bookings that are coming through?
Yeah, we are. And I mean, some of them follow those macro trends that I was kind of alluding to there. So certainly lead times are extended. Just to give you a reference point on that, a quarter of our bookings for Australia are already being booked to depart in the second half of 2022. Now, obviously, an element of that is through necessity because of uncertainty around borders, but clearly that's still already sort of 15 months in advance. We're seeing those durations be extended. We're seeing people making sure that they're not skimping on what they're spending whilst they're down there. There is an element of VFR creeping in as well. Clearly not a core market for us, but we're seeing demand for people who haven't seen friends and relatives for a couple of years, want to travel down to Australia, but then are really bolting on their core holiday as well. In terms of specific products, people traveling for longer means that there's certainly a bit more complexity in terms of what we're seeing now. We are seeing certain destinations fare quite well, whilst the major cities are all still core to the offering. They are remaining fairly flat compared to other destinations such as certainly Tasmania, Western Australia, proving very popular, perhaps plays to that bit about people wanting off the beaten track. We're seeing real demand for multi-day rail as well, that sort of form of slower travel. People wanting to do bucket list experiences. In the same category there would be products such as expedition cruising, perhaps people seeing the benefits of that sort of floating bubble, if you like, the same as the rails. So places like Great Barrier Reef and Kimberley cruising are doing very well. So it's interesting because people are certainly looking at those bucket list destinations, but they're also combining that with sort of longer durations, giving additional complexity, which is great. It means more dispersal of spend and really making their travels in Australia count.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And James, with your crystal ball in front of you now, what's your prediction for when bookings will get back to 2019 levels?
probably the most difficult question to answer, I think.
I know.
There's so many
I had
unknowns.
to throw that one in, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's fine. I'll get the crystal ball out. I mean, there are so many unknowns. I think Australia borders clearly is an unknown. I'm presuming that at some point there will be much more increased pressure from Australians travelling outbound as well, and wanting to travel internationally, which will hopefully push that timetable on border opening. But certainly from our perspective, we're working on sort of turn a year at the moment with our partners as the most likely scenario. Although, as we know, during COVID, absolutely nothing is confirmed. Air capacity is kind of, could also be a constraining picture. We've no idea what the restrictions out of the UK will be at the moment. So even if there's the ability to travel into Australia, we've obviously still got quite stringent restrictions out of the UK, and how those play out over the next 6 months will be interesting. And you've also got the elements of kind of competitor destinations as well. With those global restrictions, let's say North America is faring very well. That could be to the detriment of Australia. If destinations like South America or India don't fare very well, then that could be to the benefit of Australia and see an increase as a result. But I think overall, my view is that while the likes of Europe, Canada and USA will likely have very good summers for 2022, and we'll see that benefit. And the reality is that Australia and other Southern Hemisphere's destinations will really be waiting until last quarter of 22, beginning of 23, before we start to get back to those sort of levels of 2019. And as an organisation, globally, we're very much budgeting and forecasting on a view that 2023 is the year when we'll be back to those 2019 levels.
Okay. So Sally alluded to also about what the buyers up here will be looking for from ATE. And I know you've got two of your product managers, Paul and Tom, attending this year at ATE Online. Can you maybe give us an indication of what they'll be primarily looking for from their meetings at ATE? Yeah,
sure. So yeah, Paul Dunn, Tom Kendall will both be attending. So they'll be looking forward to meeting everybody and catching up. But I think, first and foremost, from our perspective, it's been great to see some of the investment that's gone into the industry whilst we've been away. I think I attended a market update a few weeks back, and all of the state and territory tourist offices had something new to talk about, which was really exciting. So for Tom and Paul, it'd be about getting under the skin of some of those new products as well as reconnecting with a lot of our long-term partners as well. The importance of that is clearly making sure that that product development is able to be surfaced to our clients, to really make sure that we keep Australia on a par and ahead of the competition, and maintaining Australia's share of voice when it comes to our marketing communications. The types of products that they'll be looking at, very much still experiential, that immersive stuff, which is what we've always done at Audley, but probably with a few tweaks. People will be looking for COVID secure products. The good news is that in Australia, this is kind of almost a given, really. There is great assurance around health and hygiene, so there's a great level of confidence in that compared to perhaps some competitor destinations. Sustainability is absolutely an increased focus as well. It's already been mentioned. It's certainly coming out in all of the research about people. And we'll continue to focus on our sort of unique and boutique accommodations as well, with probably a little bit of upweight to places like apartments and private stays, as we're classing our project, where people want to perhaps be outside of a larger hotel environment. I think commercially, Sally's touched on this, but certainly pricing and availability for 2022 is absolutely key. I've mentioned our sort of 10-month lead time, and I'd really encourage everybody to make sure that they're thinking about Q4 22, Q1 23 now. And when I say that, that's not just for new bookings either. I mentioned our postponement rates. Unfortunately, we're highly likely to have a number of postponements continue back end of this year and potentially into the beginning of next year. We want to make sure for us as Audley and for our supplier partners as well that we're maintaining those bookings and not giving people the opportunity to cancel and spend their pounds elsewhere as well. So that's really quite key. And within that, it is about the rates, really. That's the key to getting the booking confirmed. If it's an excursion, the scheduling that's not so important. We can kind of play around that. If there's an element of nervousness about people not knowing what days they're going to operate excursions on, we can kind of live with that, but it's making sure that we've got the visibility to be able to secure the bookings in the first place. And probably alongside that, making sure that we've got that flexibility as well. Again, all of the research is saying that consumers are looking for the health and hygiene, but also they want that flexibility. They want to know that if things don't play out and they can't travel, then they've got the ability to move their booking onwards. So those would be the key things commercially. I think, we want to get our clients excited about Australia again. We want to ensure that it's got that share of voice within our product portfolio, confirm those new inquiries, make sure that we keep existing bookings and that they don't cancel. And hopefully, by the going into 2022 and 2023, that'll ensure that we are in a much better place.
Absolutely. James, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We've actually run out of time, but that was hugely insightful. And again, we really appreciate you giving your time this morning for us. So thank you so much. I am now going to pass across to my colleague, Stuart Fife, who's our PR manager here in London. Stu.
Thanks, Pete, and hello, everyone. Since the COVID crisis began, the role of travel journalism has largely been reshaped by the impact on our industry worldwide. Where previously editors and writers had a well-honed seasonal approach to covering destinations and holiday types, almost overnight that was replaced with the need to balance constantly breaking news against more traditional travel content, all while borders and restrictions have continued. To tell us firsthand what this past year has been like in the newsroom, I'm delighted to welcome the Chief Travel Writer for the Times and the Sunday Times, Chris Haslam. Good morning, Chris.
Morning, Stuart, and good afternoon, Australia.
Thanks for joining us in the early hour, Chris. We really appreciate it.
Not at all.
Chris, looking back at sort of mid to late March last year, when I'm sure at that stage your inbox is probably full of press releases about new hotel openings and new air routes and probably some invitations on press trips. How did the events of the second half of March and then into April play out on the travel desk at the Times?
Well, the precursor to that is that because I think we thought 2020 was going to be quite a quiet year, not much happening, we'd undergone some restructuring in that the Times and the Sunday Times had merged and become a 7-day operation, meaning we were putting out content daily as opposed to once a week. And because the other problem was that we had a much shorter staff roster because we'd merged a lot more work, but thinking we'd get through it. Then this came along. We've been watching it since January, but you ask about March. In March, I was in the newspaper and on TV and radio, confidently predicting that we would be traveling by Easter. So it was always the idea it's going to be a very short-term thing, and we just had to get through it. So there was no sense that we're going to have to do 15 months of content without traveling anywhere. It was always the idea that, well, next week we'll be going somewhere, and give it another couple of weeks, we'll be going. That didn't happen. What did happen, as you said in your intro, was that new travel came out of the supplements and onto the front page, and it was changing, in some cases, hourly. And in terms of content, we went from the equivalent of a sort of healthy, well-balanced diet that you could think about to this all-you-can-eat cruise ship buffet of news. Just cut. It was, you'd write a story at, you'd file a story at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 5 o'clock the subs would be on the phone saying it's all changed. You'll rewrite it. That was how fast it was happening. In terms of how do you provide content when you can't travel anywhere? We came up with some fairly crackpot ideas. We tried things like book reviews. We tried dream destinations. We tried postcards. And I think then as it became somewhat clearer that this was going to be a very long-term thing, there was a realization that, hang on a minute, we can write about destinations, because pre-COVID, if we featured South Australia, we weren't expecting people to book South Australia for the next week. It would be book later, so it'd be plan now, travel later. It always had been that way, and COVID didn't really change that much.
Right. And then obviously, as you say, you were imagining it was going to be maybe a couple of months, and here we are a year on. With all the events of the past 12 months, has this now brought about changes to the way the travel desk operates, whether sort of temporary or some that might now be permanent?
I think we've become significantly more news focused. We've also become far more in the business of providing information. UK government guidelines have been so woolly and opaque that, you know, without talking down to readers, we've had to give them information that previously we'd have expected them to know. We had just one example last on April the 12th. This is in the UK, but on April the 12th, the guidance around the opening of campsites was so opaque that campsites didn't realize they could open if they had shared facilities. It was hidden away, buried deep in some statutes that they could open. But we were writing a feature on campsites because they were opening. I was calling campsites. They said, no, we're going to stay closed until May. We're not allowed to open. There was that level of confusion in the marketplace. And there still is amongst consumers. And that confusion has led, I know we talk an awful lot about pent-up demand, and it is there, but we have to remember there's also an increasing sense of resignation. We may have gone peak pent-up demand, and people are now saying, who I'm speaking to, I'm hearing from readers, I'm hearing from tour operators, I'm hearing from travel agents, people saying, well, it's just not worth it. It's not worth booking anything now. I'm going to wait. I'm going to go to Devon this year on holiday, and then I'll go overseas in 2022. So that's something we have to keep an eye on, and we have to keep stimulating their interest. We have to keep tempting them to travel. Because one thing's absolutely clear, this is going to be the busiest summer in history on the British coast.
Yeah, absolutely. And just sort of to expand on that approach that you're now having to take, I mean, you know, we're a year in, readers have been unable to travel for months now out of the UK. Pre-Christmas, winter sun options were limited. Last summer was very unpredictable. What's the editorial process for you and the team at the moment in deciding what and where to cover? Are you sort of trying to strike a balance of where to travel beyond the crisis, or focusing more on the realities of where we are coming into this summer that you're saying is going to be very busy?
Right, the reality at the moment is we still don't know which countries are going to be on the government's traffic light list when it's announced. We expect, again, we don't know, it's all done by rumour. It will be March the 10th. They will say in 7 days, these are the countries you can travel to. So there's a lot of speculation around that at the moment. We can't commission or publish anything yet on those destinations because we're not certain what they are. And that is key to all content. We can fill the newspaper with stories about the UK. I've just embarked on the 11th version of the Great British Beach Guide, which is 6 weeks of driving around the British coast. And that will be very big. But in terms of overseas content, for example, Australia, that is tied to an opening date. There'll be nothing until we get an opening date. And then there'll be a flurry of interest. And it's not just Australia. We've got our eyes on Sri Lanka, we've got our eyes on India, South America, the whole world, but there's no point publishing anything until we at least get some indication of when it might open. We need a news hook to publish the story. So we can't just randomly say, travel to Sri Lanka now.
Yep, makes sense. And just to, you mentioned that with readers, for a lot, there's that sense of resignation. In terms of the reader sentiment, what do you think they're feeling towards long haul, looking beyond the summer?
I think, well, this is echoing what Sally and James have said. I think there's been a societal psychological change. I think what the pandemic has taught people is not to put off until tomorrow what you can do today. And you know, the best example of that, this wasn't Australia, the best example of this was I met a guy on the Welsh coastal path, and he said, yep, he said, we've been talking about doing, me and the wife, we've been talking about doing this for 20 years, he said, and finally I'm out here doing it. And I said, well, where's the wife? And he said, well, she died last year. And the message was, don't put it off. And we've learned from the pandemic that things can change. You can lose your life, You can lose the right to travel. Bear in mind, at the moment, it's illegal to go on holiday in the UK. I mean, who'd have thought that would ever happen? It's against the law to go on holiday. That has taught us not to dream of the future, but to go now. And I think in terms of long haul, that's going to happen much more so than short haul. People are happy to put off the Mediterranean holiday and go camping, but they are going to go and drive Route 66. They are going to do their rock, reef and bridge tour. And it's giving them something to look forward to. The other thing we have to bear in mind is, yes, everyone's cash rich at the moment. Yes, they're this revenge travel. It sounds like something Liam Neeson does, doesn't it? Revenge travel. It exists, but we have to bear in mind that there's a possibility coming down that all nations have incurred a staggering amount of debt. That debt has got to be paid off. At the moment, we've got a very, very buoyant travel property market in the UK because there's a stamp duty holiday. That's going to come to an end. There is a risk that inflation rates will rise later this summer and interest rates will rise later this summer and really impinge on people's spending ability. So I think those people, the key is to get the bookings in now, not to wait, because people may not have the money later in the year, or they may be wanting to spend their money on more important things than travel, if there is anything more important than travel.
Yeah, right. And then just turning to Australia, it's a destination you've been to before. There are parts of the country that you know very well. Do you want to give us just a quick snapshot of your previous travels in Australia, where you've been, and your perception of Australia as a destination?
Well, I've been everywhere in Australia, I think. Well, not everywhere, but I've been all round. My last trip was to South Australia last September. That was wonderful. I then spent some time in Queensland, in the sailing around the Whitsundays, which was fabulous. I've got a long-term fascination with Australia. And Adelaide was the museum. There's a museum in Adelaide. It just fascinated me, of the Settlers Museum there. It's always astonishes me that people sailed from all around the world to Australia to colonize it in the 19th century, and that was the equivalent of space travel back then. It was taking you months to get to somewhere, and you had to. It was like landing on a new planet and having to be totally self-sufficient. It fascinates me. I mean, it's the thing at Aqaba where they spent 14 years building a fence at Aqaba. These things, they stick with me. It's much more than the sights in Australia, which are spectacular. It's as much the human experience there, and I think we've talked about earlier, about more meaningful travel, people seeking more authentic and memorable experiences. Those experiences you'll find not, I hate to say it, not rock, reef and bridge. You'll find those in the small towns and talking to people there about. And the other great thing, going through the petrol, finding what's on sale in Aussie petrol stations is fantastic. I've got a library of books I've picked up in Aussie petrol stations. Going back, if I was to go back again, which I'd love to do, I want to drive Route 1 from Perth round to Darwin.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely make that happen for you as soon as we're able to get you back to Australia when restrictions allow. Now, you mentioned earlier the sort of new mindset of the traveller and this more considered way of travel that we're expecting travellers to embrace. A part of that sort of new pattern of behaviour often has sustainability come up as a topic for future travel. You've obviously been writing about sustainability for many years. What are your perceptions of how the concept of sustainable travel has evolved in recent years, and how do you think the last 12 months has reset or changed how we'll view sustainable travel going forward?
Before last January, the biggest story in travel was sustainability. It was David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg were dominating the agenda. We've already mentioned the Flygskam, the flight shaming movement. That was gaining some ground. Then the pandemic came along, which was probably very good for the planet. It has put sustainability back, but only temporarily, I think. First of all, what we have to remember is that the desire for sustainable travel is nowhere near as big as the media says it is. I think the last YouGov poll was January 2020, and they found that less than half of customers inquired about sustainability when they were buying a holiday. So it's clear that the change which has to come will have to come from the industry. It will be industry-led. I think the analogy is, they made Mars bars smaller, but that wasn't due to public demand. It just happened. And it's the same thing with travel. It's going to have to become more, rather than giving the customer the choice, the industry is just going to say, that's the way it is, we're doing it this way. In the short term, though, we're going to see a summer of sun, sand, and sangria. It's going to be ghastly out there. I see it as analogous with when people have done dry January, and if the 1st of February falls on a Friday, they go out and they get absolutely slaughtered, and then they wake up the next morning in a state of self-hatred. And I think that may happen this summer, because we are being bombarded in the UK. It really is. It's a media agenda. It's all over the BBC at the moment. The sustainability thing. We've got COP coming to Glasgow. We've got the G7 coming to Cornwall. So climate change. It may be that we stop calling it climate change at the newspaper. We may agree to call it climate emergency, which is really ramping it up. That is going to be on everybody's mind. And when they get back from their revenge spending post-lockdown splurge, I think then there'll be time for reflection. But I still say the change has to come from the industry. That I can't see, in the short term, I cannot see people going into a travel agency and demanding that, I want to offset my flight costs, and I want to stay in a locally owned property, and I want to take public transport. I think that will come down, as I say, to the tour operator. But in the long term, that will change. I'll tell you one quick story. This was last year when we could travel. In January last year, I was in a travel agency in a small town in the UK. Mum and dad were sat at the front with the agent booking the holiday. Kids were sat at the back swiping on their phones. Mum turned around to the daughter, who was sort of 14, 15, and said, "But do you want to join us? Do you want to actually come and we're booking the family holiday? Do you want to come and sit with us?" And the daughter just looked up from her phone and said, "I think you're disgusting for making us fly anywhere." Now that's interesting, because in 5 years' time, she'll be making the decisions. She'll be choosing where she flies. And that's when hopefully the industry will be in a much more sustainable place. It will need to be. I spoke to Nigel Huddleston, the UK tourism minister. He pointed out that the companies that don't embrace sustainability won't be here in 10 years' time.
Interesting. And for a destination like Australia, as well as sustainability credentials that we'll want to lean into, are there other qualities about Australia as a destination that you think this new mindset and the new traveller will really be drawn to?
I don't think that being so far away is necessarily a problem. I honestly think that European city breaks are more at risk than long-haul travel to Australia, because you're so far, the whole mantra is fly less, stay longer. I mean, that's something Australia's always done. Sally pointed out earlier, people stay 30 days in Australia. It's not popping to Barcelona for the weekend. So therefore, it's much more, it's an easier choice. It's a dream destination. The facility is there to offset. And you do have an awful lot of intrinsically sustainable travel already there. I mean, what did I do? Last time I was there, I did a road trip up to Aqaba. I then went to the Whitsundays and sailed around. I mean, that's all pretty green and sustainable. Yes, I flew in a helicopter to an island, which I hated doing. People will choose. I hope that operators will give people the choice. For example, landing in Hamilton and flying to, a short helicopter ride. It's utterly unconscionable now to do that. There's a boat. Take a boat. It might take you a bit longer, but it's greener. I also did a heli swag. I'm doing lots of helicopter flights. I did a heli swag Aqaba, which I was deeply uncomfortable with as well. I think that's something that belongs to the 1980s, and we have to stop the very, very obviously climate costly excursions. You can do it. You have the ability. It's a matter of, it's the mindset, isn't it? That's the client wants. The client would love a helicopter ride. Well, in future, the client won't love a helicopter ride.
Yeah. Gotcha. And you mentioned in the past, obviously Australia was perceived as being a long way away. You said that's not really going to be an issue in moving forward. Do you think there are other qualities like the wide open space, the diversity of experiences? Do you think all of these will play into what your reader and what the British traveller is looking for as well?
I mentioned before a news hook. You need a news hook for every story. I think journalists will take that on. You know, Australia, wide open spaces. It's sort of it's naturally socially distanced. It's self-sustaining, largely self-sustaining. You would use that as a news hook. Would that make a Mr. and Mrs. Higginbotham choose to go to Australia or the United States? Would it be a break point? No. They're really, you know better than me. People are going to see the sights, aren't they? They're not going there for the health reasons. And I think they will continue. They want to see, again, you know, we keep saying it, rock, reef and bridge. That's what they want to see. They may appreciate the wide open spaces, the clean air, the fabulous food when they get there, but that's not why they're going.
Yeah, so still the real icons that you see as the draw cards.
Yeah, but maybe do the icons in different ways, or maybe ignore find some new icons.
Yeah, great insight. Chris, we're at time, so unfortunately we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you again for joining us this morning. Really appreciate you giving your time.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, Stuart.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Right now, I'll pass it on to Dominic, who's going to host a brief Q&A.
Thanks for that, Stu. We'll get everyone coming back online now. It'll be the Brady Bunch going on here. All right. Thanks so much to those of you who have sent through some questions either beforehand or during this session. And if you do have any questions, feel free to send those through using the little Q&A section at the bottom, and we will try and get to those. Yeah, thanks everyone for those updates. Some really interesting points there, and you know, I think, you know, especially sort of those trends talked about in particular by you, James, you know, around that confidence, health, hygiene sort of thing that people are looking for. And I guess we'll start with a question to you actually, like how do you think that, you know, are operators going to have to really, I guess, change anything in what they do in terms of their experiences or their accommodation to really work with, I guess, the new traveller in this sort of new normal world that we live in?
I think, yeah, to a degree. I mean, we're fairly fortunate at Audley that we've always done that. We've always looked for that sort of boutique accommodation. Obviously, a lot of what we do is very well placed. It is by nature tailor-made travel, and therefore socially distanced. So I think we're in a fairly good place on that. But there's no doubt, I think, as I was saying, it's key that we are making sure that we're giving clients reassurance around the health and safety aspect. And in Australia, as a destination, because of the way that you've managed it down there, and perception-wise, it's certainly very well placed to take advantage of that. We've got a dedicated risk team who work on the health and safety side, and there's no doubt that there will be sort of increased investment in that area over the next couple of months.
So is that the sort of information that when operators are, you know, providing information to you and Audley, is that the sort of info that they're looking for? And even around ATE, like what are people doing to accommodate for these sorts of things?
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, we're obviously, it's about managing expectations and making sure that we can be kind of an open and honest as possible. And we have what we call a dedicated country reopening group. So we have a team who are focused on that. And as destinations open their borders, we then work with our suppliers and our DMCs in destination and the tourist boards to understand a number of things, both, you know, the aviation side, fairly standard across the globe, but then it's really focusing on, okay, well, what will the experience actually be like in country? You know, what does that mean in terms of some of the infrastructure, restrictions on masks, social distancing? Will they be able to enjoy the type of holiday that they want? So you've kind of got the practical side of things around the infrastructure. And then you've got the product related bits, which is discussions at ATE. So just understanding, what testing might be in place, how staff are prepared for the arrival of clients and so on. So it's that sort of thing, so that our country specialists, who are our salespeople, can then talk the client through their journey and each of their touch points to give them that level of reassurance.
Excellent, excellent. We had a question come in around the world of business events, and I know, Sally, you had something to sort of add around that, and how that will look, or what the interest has been, and what that space is looking like.
Yes, absolutely. We've been maintaining a similar approach, so staying in touch with our key partners up here in market, and working with the trade media up here just to ensure that the Business Events Australia brand maintains consistency of presence in market. We've been running regular customer advisory panels. Well, when I say regular, every 6 months. And that's really just to engage with our key partners here and see how they're faring. And it's really insightful. There's a sense of optimism. So the messages are very much that Australia as a destination has the experience and the product that they're seeking, and it just all comes down to when they can start returning, especially for the incentive sector. They are excited to get back. So watch this space.
And I know it was touched on by Chris about, I guess, how they can't talk about anything until there are specific timeframes. But with the talk of green lanes between the UK and other markets, what's sort of the view on which one of our competitors are the likely ones? I know the US seems to index really highly, so it's almost two questions. What's the vibe on when the US will open, and what's the US doing to basically show us up like that?
Yeah, well, I think we need to be concerned when, to be honest, they do get their act together and start actively promoting. I think Australia has been a bit of a standout just in what we've been doing with the trade particularly. But yeah, it's all conjecture at the moment until we hear from the government on their new traffic light system and what destinations will be added to it. I don't know if James or Chris have any insights that they can share on this topic. It's the 10th of May. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's what we're hearing is the 10th of May. I think comparing Australia with the United States is it's Australia 5, United States 0. I've heard nothing from the United States for 15 months. I couldn't even get the Oval Office to give me comment on when they might open. So in terms of marketing and promotion, Australia is streets ahead of the US. And I've got to say that bears out. I meant to say this earlier. Speaking to just in terms of general inquiries that people, when they meet me, or not so much in the press, but when they talk to me, because I work in travel, people are asking me about Australia. They're not asking about the United States. It's so I think that's probably down to your marketing and to the image you've got. You've got a much more positive image than the United States at the moment. You haven't got Minneapolis going on. So yeah, I think it's much more positive for Australia than America. When will it open? I think it will be on the green list. And Shai Weiss, who heads Virgin Atlantic, is extremely confident that it's going to be open by May the 17th at the earliest, end of May at the latest, he told me.
Mm.
And we have had a question come in, because obviously VFR polls really highly for UK visitors coming into Australia. What's sort of your thoughts on how operators can better target that VFR market?
We're looking into this at the moment because it's an obvious tactical starter strategy once travel restrictions do lift. So there has to be a way, and there will be a way, where we can coordinate Australians to extend the invitation to their friends and relatives here in the UK. So we're looking at a bit of a push-pull strategy. Well, we'll be marketing up here to the Brits to get down there, a way of really incentivising Australians to do the same and invite people down. So watch this space. We'll be back with some more detail.
Fantastic. And on that note, TA family, thank you. And then thank you, James and Chris, for joining us as well. Just a reminder that the recording of this will be sent around, as well as the presentation of today. And be sure to sign up for future briefings. And with that, I'll let you guys get on with the rest of your day. And I'm sure that for people here, it's beer o'clock for many. So thank you, and we shall see you at the next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.